Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, whatever it is, time of day it is that you're joining us. Thank you for joining us for Conversations from 6 Feet. As I've said before, this is more now like 6 miles. And during a very strange time of separation, distancing, trust that each of you are feeling the presence of God in some miraculous way as we really wait on Him to do what He's going to do through this. Thanks for joining us. And what we try to do here, for those of you who have not joined us before, is really provide some helpful tips or some very practical suggestions in this time of crisis, because we're all going through this together. There's nobody that is immune from this. And it's quite a family that we've joined really around the world. And I want to welcome to our interview, Joshua Dobi. Thanks, Joshua, for joining us. It's good to have you here. And why don't we start just by telling us, why would you and I be having this conversation? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Tom. Thank you much. First, I'm glad to be a part of this process with you, even if it's in less than certainly desirable kinds of circumstances. But I'm a covenant partner and elder at Bethel Church, Tom, where you are the senior pastor. I'm also the founder and president of North Main Financial Group. We're an investment management and financial services firm with offices here in North Carolina and also in Pennsylvania.
And so thank you for bringing that experience. You've had a lot of experience in finances, and I think a lot of people will be very eager to hear your words of wisdom in all this. But you're also a family man, and
Yes.
so I'd love for us to kind of open that curtain a little bit, if we can. Tell us what's happening in the Dobi household through all of this.
Well, because of the amount of excitement, which I'm sure is true for many of our viewers and listeners to this session, because of the amount of excitement at home, I've actually escaped to my office where literally no one else is here right now, so that I might have a little bit of quiet. But quite seriously, I am blessed with a beautiful wife and two young daughters, age 6 and age 8. So we have a first grader and a third grader. And like so many folks who are listening here, we are getting accustomed quickly to the whole idea of e-learning. And frankly, my wife, Carrie, is doing the yeoman's efforts of keeping the kids on a schedule and still being able to provide for our household. It is a challenging circumstance, again, as I know it is for so many folks during this time.
Well, thank you, Joshua. And yes, you're right. There's so many parents now who are going through this time, and there was no manual on this. Again, this is
Right.
This is new season for all of us. And I think what I'd like to really jump into, and part of that newness, is the Congress just passed a $2 trillion. Who would have ever thought that we would have a $2 trillion act that goes through Congress, both sides, and then gets signed by the president? And it's called the CARES Act. It just passed a couple days ago. And would love to have your kind of input on that. What are some takeaways from that that you might want to share with us?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. And obviously, in the interest of time and to make sure folks don't just plain doze off here, the act itself is roughly 900 pages long. So I'm just going to offer a couple of things that I think may apply to many in our listening and viewing audience. There obviously are literally thousands of different details that are part of the act that was passed by Congress here just a couple of days ago. So it's very, very important that folks understand what it means for their particular situation. So we're not saying this applies to everybody. I'm going to give as many caveats as I can as I'm going through just a couple of the highlight points, but it's very, very important that everybody takes a look at it on their own so that they can understand what the act means for their particular situation. First big item, though, that's going to apply to most folks who are within this bracket, and that is the distribution of literally hard dollars or a check or an electronic deposit from the IRS in the amount of $1,200 per person and $500 per dependent child if, as a single person, when you file your taxes, you are under $100,000 a year of income, as denoted by last year's return, Or if you are as a married filing jointly, if you are under $200,000 of income, then again, you might receive either a hard copy check or an electronic deposit sometime over the next 3 to 4 weeks from the time of this recording, $1,200 per person and $500 per dependent child. And when we're talking about per person, if you're married, that means $1,200 each. If you have 3 children who are dependents on your tax return, that can mean $500 each for each of those children. So when you're putting that together, the number actually gets quite sizable quite quickly for many of our folks. So very, very important to keep that in mind. Again, we're probably 3 to 4 weeks out from the time of this recording before folks are going to begin to see that. But that's one of the most notable items, I think, that applies to so many folks who may be listening and watching here. Second big item that we've seen, and this applies to folks who may need to take a withdrawal from a retirement account this year during 2020, especially if they're in a space of hardship, although it doesn't have to be in a space of hardship. So if you are under the age of 59 and a half and you are taking a withdrawal from a retirement account, 401k, IRA, company retirement plan, personal retirement plan of some other shape, size, and variety. Usually speaking, if you are under age 59 and a half and you take out from a pre-tax account, that amount will be taxable to you, plus there'll be a 10% penalty. However, as part of the CARES Act, that 10% penalty goes away. Now, very important to keep in mind, though, it's still taxable to you. So sometimes I just draw out an example for folks. Let's say you have an IRA that has $100,000 in it. You take a $10,000 distribution from that and you're 45 years old. And you take it because you're either being laid off, you had your hours cut, you're just needing to have some extra cash in order to pay bills. That $10,000 that you take from that retirement account would normally be taxable to you, plus an additional 10% penalty. With this passing of this act, it's still taxable to you, but that 10% penalty goes away. And that's on a maximum up to, again, of $100,000 in distribution from a retirement plan. So with a top end of $100,000 in terms of distribution, that 10% tax goes away. Third big item that it's important for folks to keep in mind, this is more of a calendar kind of thing, but as part of this act and several pieces, in addition to the CARES Act, the tax filing deadline has been moved from April 15th to July 15th. Also, what has moved in that space is the ability to make contributions to retirement accounts, meaning normally to make a retirement account contribution for the previous year, you have to have that done by April 15th. Now you have until July 15th. So a 3-month reprieve for folks who are filing their taxes. However, what we're generally recommending to folks, and again, everybody's situation is different and unique, what we're generally recommending to folks, though, is if you are entitled to a refund, don't wait. File it as quickly as possible. The IRS has a rough guideline of about 21 days, in which at this point, understanding that a lot of things are very fluid right now, but they have a rough guideline of about 21 days in which they'll process your return and have your refund, if you're eligible, sent out to you. So if you are already eligible for a refund, we strongly encourage folks, you probably want to file as quickly as possible.
Joshua, thanks. Those are great takeaways from rather comprehensive 900 plus page bill or act, and thanks for boiling that down for us. I guess one of the comments that I've already gotten from a couple of folks is they've lost their jobs, and in a couple of cases have had to lay some people off. So they're on the other side of that we often don't think about. Is there any quick word for that kind of situation there?
There really is, and I'm really glad that you asked that, Tom, because this also is going to apply literally, as we saw this past week with the weekly filing of jobless claims, to millions of folks in this country already. And we anticipate that the numbers are going to continue to increase here over the next couple of weeks. If you have been laid off or fired from your position or furloughed from your position, furlough sometimes meaning that you've been laid off with an expectation that you may be called back in the future, you likely, again, everybody's situation unique, so you want to check on it for each of your individual situations, you likely will be eligible for unemployment insurance or unemployment compensation. Each state in the country manages their own unemployment insurance, meaning that you file based upon your state of residence. and every single state has a little bit of difference associated with it. So I really can't give a blanket, here's what you do for every state, because I'm sure folks will be listening from around the country and watching from around the country to this recording. So you want to check with your individual state, but please know that you are likely eligible. And please know that there are also avenues for additional compensation that before this act was passed were not available to you, meaning that it's possible, depending upon your particular situation and depending upon the state in which you live or declare as residents, that you may be eligible for compensation above the normal unemployment insurance amount. That's very, very important for folks to keep in mind, because the unemployment insurance calculation is something that's done very specifically based upon your immediate past income. This additional compensation for which you may be eligible, again, dependent upon your particular circumstance, is not dependent upon your particular compensation level. It can be a fixed amount. So folks definitely want to take a look at that. Definitely want to take a look at what the options may be in terms of filing for both of those tranches of income. Also, the time frame has been extended where you can receive unemployment insurance, meaning that it was for 26 weeks and it now has been extended at this point for another 13 weeks. Now, we've heard a lot about how that may get extended even further. That may be possible as of this recording. That has not happened yet, but there has been an extension in terms of for how long you may be able to receive unemployment insurance beyond what is was the normal before the COVID-19 economic issues arose. But please, I can't emphasize this enough. Everybody's situation is unique. So it's very, very important that folks take a look at their particular state of residence to see that for which they qualify. The other side of that coin, Tom, exactly as you highlight, is on the employer side of things. So we just talked about the employee end of things, where folks can qualify for unemployment insurance and perhaps an additional compensation level while they're on unemployment insurance above that. Now on the employer side, there are also a number of faculties which literally just several weeks ago in some cases didn't even exist, and others that did exist now have expanded greatly. And for the most part, at this point, those faculties that from which employers can tap are being run through the SBA, or the Small Business Association. So what I would strongly, strongly encourage all employers to do, I mean, even if you don't think that you qualify, the worst that the SBA can tell you is no. It's definitely worth your time to take a look at it. Go to sba.gov, sba.gov. There are a number of excellent links there that begin to filter you through the process to see if you, as an employer, may be eligible for all kinds of relief. Everything from some temporary relief or even semi-permanent relief in paying payroll taxes, in covering literally things like rent or a mortgage on a commercial piece of property, if it's your primary place of business, helping with payroll for employees if you retain those employees. And there are some exceptionally high limits that have been given to that, especially for our smaller business owners, relative to the amount of payroll that can be covered for maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe more. Now, it's important to understand that the ones that we're seeing through the SBA right now are not being done as grants, they're being done as loans. So there is a process. You do need to file your substantiating financial paperwork to be able to qualify for that. But if you do, in some instances, again, not all, in some instances, if you qualify, and specifically for employers, if you maintain your employee base during the entire time of that loan, there is a possibility for some of our employers that loan is completely forgiven.
That's amazing.
So it is. I mean, and so again, very, very dynamic, unusual, obviously, in its circumstance, but definitely, just as a concluding thought, just like the first one, we strongly are encouraging literally every employer that we know, whether they've laid off folks or not, whether they're working remotely or not, whether they're considered an essential business or not, go to check out the SBA.gov website, see what the possibilities may be there. Again, the worst that can happen is you end up exactly where you are right now.
And here I'm speaking to you as partly an elder of the church,
Sure.
And a man of faith. You have a tremendous amount of faith. A man of the world as well, aware of the financial thing. If you could just maybe sum up a couple of points, bringing those two worlds together.
Sure.
What would you say to us?
Sure. Thanks, Tom, for that. And That absolutely is part and parcel to what we do. As we are certainly engaged professionally, we certainly are guided by our faith. And one of the quick things that we've been saying to folks, regardless of their particular disposition of faith, is that we've been here before. One of the advantages of having the amount of gray that I have on the top of my head and being in the investment management and financial services business for now about a quarter of a century is that we've seen things like this before. Maybe not exactly like this in terms of the public health issue and the ways that we've needed to address it, but certainly from an economic standpoint, from a financial markets standpoint, we've been here before. There are many folks who I'm sure are going to be watching on the call here who are going to say, I remember 2008 and 2009, and that was a very, very challenging time. But it was also very different from the time where we are right now, meaning that in 2008 and 2009, we had some significant issues from an economic stability and structure standpoint. That's not where we are today. There were significant measures taken at a federal level and at a state level to shore up our financial system coming out of 2008 and 2009, which frankly have allowed us to be in a space today where we're able to address the economic issues relative to this public health fallout. And that's very, very important because sometimes folks say, well, it feels like it did 12 years ago. And yes, as we're watching stock market gyrations and 401k balances jumping around all over the place, yes, it can. However, the genesis of it is very, very different. I think that's very important that folks keep in mind. And I'm speaking it then coming back into the blending of those worlds, Tom. There's no reason to be anxious here. There's no reason to be fearful. It almost never is wise to make a rash emotional decision of substance during these kinds of times. And that's true whether we're in extremes or not, but it certainly is applicable during these times. And I'm saying that not insensitive at all to the very, very challenging places where so many of our viewers are at this time. But it's biblical. It's actually rock solid biblical not to be anxious for today because of the ways in which we are kept by Almighty God. And that drives a lot of what we do. But coming to the secular aspect of things, again, we've been here before. There have been significant measures taken now by Congress to be able to provide some underlying stability to our workforce. And as we get to a space of mitigation relative to COVID-19, and then we move towards a space of more vaccination and inoculation, then we're going to be able to pivot forward in some pretty notable ways. And those are the kinds of things that we encourage folks to keep in mind.
Joshua, thanks for wrapping that up with that word about what Paul writes, be anxious for nothing. And one thing that I would encourage, not just because I'm a pastor, but because my wife and I practice a biblical tithe and beyond, is that when those checks do come, many people have been praying, God, please help in some way. And that can come in a lot of ways, even through the government. And so when these checks come, consider a gift of that. Give that widow's mite back to God. He gave it to us. Let's give that back to him and see how he blesses us through that expression of sacrificial giving. Again, I say that not as a pastor. I say that just as a man. In fact, I know that you would say the same thing. And that this is just part of our lives as Christians, as brothers and sisters. Joshua, thanks for being with us. And we've taken some time, people, a little bit longer maybe than normal, but I thought that this would be a good opportunity to get some great information out to you all. Our next conversations from 6 Feet is going to be on grief. We're going to bring in a man from Birmingham, a doctor who has done a lot, who's a specialist on grief and trauma. And we're all grieving right now. I think of so many ways that we're grieving the loss of certain pieces that small things, big things, what have you. So I look forward to bringing that to you. We're going to spend actually a couple of sessions on that one. So blessings on your day. God be with you all wherever you're at, and Joshua, especially you, as you bring people through this time of chaos and with money, and that's very important. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Tom.